Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah is planning on going for re-election. He plans to run again, even though he is 86 years old and promised that he would not seek re-election. Now, there are politics behind that we'll get to in just a second, but why do we think he's going to run for re-election? Well, he gave this statement recently: I'm planning on running again because I still have the chairmanship of the Finance Committee, and there'll never be another Utahn. How do you say that?
No one knows.
Okay, there'll be
not even the people in Utah.
There'll never be another person from Utah that's chairman of the committee, at least not for 40 or 50 years. Okay, so now that prompted a somewhat critical op-ed by the largest paper in Utah. It was a Tribune editorial, the Salt Lake Tribune, and they gave reasons for why they don't want him to run for re-election. Hatch's part in the dramatic dismantling of the Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monuments was one of the reasons. Another reason was his role as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee in passing a major overhaul of the nation's tax code. Now, to be fair, the editorial board at the paper was in favor of that, and that was the reason why they were writing this piece about him, and they referred to him as the Utahn of the year.
So here's my favorite part of Anna's telling of that story. When she wants you to calm down and not jump to conclusions, she will reach out and tell you, like, hold on, okay?
So, I know, because it's like every little thing is being, like everyone's being critical of every little word that comes out of your mouth. So you're like, wait,
hold on.
Let me clarify what I'm saying.
Okay. Anyway, so the editorial isn't saying that it's a bad thing that he passed that tax. So one of the points that they keep emphasizing is Orrin Hatch kept saying that the tax cut was the main reason he was staying in office, and we took him at his word, and now he got the tax cut that he'd always dreamed of.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this thing up. So that's reason number 2 why you should go.
And now here's another thing that they were critical of, though: his utter lack of integrity that rises from his unquenchable thirst for power.
Okay. Damn, now that's critical.
So that's pretty critical. And recently, the editorial director, George Pyle, was on CNN, I believe, talking about why it is that he's been so critical of Orrin Hatch. And I want you to hear from him, and then judge for yourself in regard to what he has to say. But then there's the political component of what's going on behind the scenes that I really want to talk about.
Yeah, we'll talk about that after the video.
Yeah.
You mentioned something interesting, though. You talked about a potential, it sounded like, missed opportunity for other candidates. Is that how you see this, Orrin Hatch staying in the Senate, leading to missed opportunities?
Oh, very much so. I think that he's resting on his laurels. He thinks this seat belongs to him rather than to the people of Utah. 10 years ago, the convention system, the Republican Party in Utah took out Senator Bob Bennett with a challenge from the right. Senator Hatch was very much afraid that the same thing would happen to him. He ran saying, look, I'm the influential guy in the Senate. You don't want to lose my power. Two of the things I will do with my power are chip and DACA. He did neither. There's no particular reason to believe that he deserves another 6 years to do those things. Anybody who would replace him from the middle of the Republican Party would probably vote the same way, but would be less in a position of having gone back on his word, and would probably be rather less embarrassing in the way he's kowtowing to the president. I mean, the possible alternative to Senator Hatch, whether as a challenger or as a successor, if the senator does step aside, is Mitt Romney. 95–98% of the time he would probably vote the same way that a Senator Hatch would, but we would be spared the embarrassment of him sucking up to the president.
So
that was good.
That was awesome. My favorite part was the anchor, who she was looking to cut him off. I understand he was going a little long, and then he says, like, he drops the hammer on Hatch, and she's like, oh, no, keep going.
Well, he used the word embarrassing.
Yes.
And yeah, at that point, don't interrupt him. He's about to say some interesting things. I love every part of what he had to say toward the end there, because look, Orrin Hatch wasn't from what I gather, this is my read of the situation, he wasn't planning on running for re-election. Homeboy's 86. Like, no offense to anyone who's 86, but senators serve 6-year terms. Homeboy's 86. Like, time to pack up your bags, like, go to retire, enjoy the rest of your life. But the reason why he's seeking re-election is because Trump doesn't want Mitt Romney. Right?
Yeah.
He doesn't want Mitt Romney. He hates Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney hates him. Mitt Romney is less likely to kowtow and do whatever Trump wants him to do. Orrin Hatch, on the other hand, seems to love Trump and will do anything for Trump.
So let's break this down a little bit further. Before I get to the Mitt Romney drama, which I absolutely love, let me give you some great quotes and facts here. So number one, Orrin Hatch has been in the Senate for 42 years.
Just
I mean, 42
pack
years
up the
in
bags.
the Senate. Longest serving Republican senator in US history. He's been a senator from Utah longer than 60% of the population of Utah has been alive. That's an amazing stat, right? 60% of the people that live in Utah were not alive when Orrin Hatch first became a US senator.
If he gets reelected, he'll be 92 at the end of that term.
In 1976, when he first ran against a 3-term incumbent Frank Moss, he said, "What do you call a senator who served in office for 18 years? You call him home." What do you call a senator who's been in office for 42 years instead of 18 years? You call him home. In 1983, he admonished others, "You should not fall in love with DC. Elected politicians shouldn't stay here too long." Oops. And so when he first came into, this is why people hate politicians. When he was first running against an incumbent, he was like, "Oh, we got to get out the incumbents. The incumbents are terrible. They're too entrenched, etc." Now that he's an incumbent, he's like, "I'm entrenched. Isn't it wonderful? I'm the head of this committee. You'll never get another Utahn to be a head of this committee. I have all this power, and I used to help my rich friends. Isn't it great? I just passed these giant tax cuts, not for you guys, you're not gonna get it, but 83% of the tax cuts are gonna go to the top 1%. That's all my donors. So they want me to stay, and Trump wants me to stay because I kiss his ass day in and day out. And part of the reason why people in Utah are mad, and by the way, 3/4 of people in Utah think that Orrin Hatch should retire.
3/4.
That's massive, right? So one is because that monuments thing is not a small thing. Conservatives are really pissed about that too. So he cut Bears Ears National Monument by 90%. He was supposed to fight on that, and he didn't. And he betrayed not just progressives, but conservatives who care about public lands in Utah that they use instead of letting corporations use it, right? So, and then the second reason is Mormons don't love Trump. And remember, there was a challenger to Trump, a fifth party guy, Evan McMullen, who ran in Utah and did really well in Utah. And part of the reason they don't like it is because Mormons actually identify a little bit with outsiders and an immigrant mentality. So they didn't like Trump's crass talk about that. So every culture in America is slightly different. Mormons are very conservative, but they didn't like the crassness of Donald Trump, especially in regards to that issue and they very carefully protect, obviously, their religious identity. And Trump has not been sensitive to that. Conservatives have not been sensitive to that. Steve Bannon was just talking about how Mitt Romney ran away from Vietnam and uses faith as an excuse. Boy, people in Utah did not like that at all, right? So for all these reasons, they've got issues with Orrin Hatch. But really, the underlying power play here is Mitt Romney's trying to squeeze Orrin Hatch out of the seat. Look, I give Mitt Romney credit for one thing, and it's not his diatribes against Trump that happen from time to time or Roy Moore. Because you remember after the election, after he called Trump a phony and a fraud, then he went and became Reek, and when he thought he could get the Secretary of State position. No, the credit I give Mitt Romney is, that son of a bitch doesn't give up. Like, he wants to be president more than anyone wants any job in this country.
More than Hillary Clinton?
Apparently so, because he lost once, he lost a second time. And now he's like, screw it, I'll be a senator and I'll claw my way up from there. So this is him using every contact he's got in Utah to be like, I thought this son of a bitch was gonna leave and I was just gonna walk into that seat. He's not leaving, somebody give me a ship.
So do you think that he will challenge him in a primary?
So he thinks that it's not politically savvy to challenge him in a primary. So he's trying to push him off the cliff so that he could just waltz in. He got 73% of the vote in Utah when he was up against Obama in the presidential race in 2012. So if Hatch isn't running, that's a Romney's seat. He'll take it in a cakewalk, right? But if Hatch is running, that's bloody and it'll he might lose, and then losing his Senate seat, that would be mortifying. He's got to have it guaranteed. And Hatch is a fighter. There's no reason. I mean, like, he's corrupt. He serves all of his donors, etc. But there's a reason why he's been in Senate for 42 years. He's not easy. He's not going to be easy to push out. So this is Romney, and Romney's deeply connected in Utah. Romney's Mormon and has all these connections, and he's using all of them to push Hatch out the door.
By the way, Hatch is 83, not 86. I don't know why he was 80. I thought he was 86, but it doesn't matter. Next year he's going to be 84, and it's not about age. Yeah, it is about age. You're in your mid 80s. I'm sorry, like really, you're going to serve a 6-year term as a senator? No,
it's not that. Look, I see what you're saying about age, not in that to discriminate against age, but like, hey, dude, enjoy the lobbyist money or something. Go, like, have fun.
No, it's about providing an opportunity for fresh blood. That's what I mean when I talk about age.
That's what I was going to get to, Anna. But the main part of the age thing is, it's not how old he is, it's how long he's served. And look, I think conservatives make an interesting point about term limits. And Coburn, for all he was a super weirdo, and I disagree with him on 98 out of 100 things, but he said term limits and he meant it, and he left Congress. So at least he was honest about it. Orrin Hatch was never honest about any of that stuff. And he's like Gollum. He's like, precious, holding on to that Senate seat. Yes, 42 years is enough.
Yes.
Let someone else serve. And it's not like Utah's going to pick I would love it if they picked a progressive, but that's not the point here. They're likely to pick Mitt Romney, who I have no love for at all. It's just I'm done with Orrin Hatch's lies and corruption. You just watched a video by the Young Turks, the home of the revolution. If you'd like to get the full show, come join us and become a member. tytnetwork.com/join.